country is facing the gravest political crisis, the like of which we've not seen for more than a generation. And the undeniable truth is that this is something the government has created for itself, because since the word go, it has chosen not to reach out across a divided country and try and build a political consensus on the question of our relationship with the European mainland. It has instead looked inward to the party of government, trying to patch over divisions within the Conservative Party. And I have to say, at least this latest insult by the executive to the legislature in interrupting our debate on its proposals and denying us a vote this year on them is consistent. Because it isn't the case that the government has suspended this process to fundamentally rethink the proposals it has and listen to the concerns across this House. Oh no, it's doing so only for a very narrow agenda, which is to placate the extreme right wing of its own party in terms of their concerns about the Northern Ireland backstop. And I have to say, the Northern Ireland backstop is perhaps the least offensive of the proposals that are before this House today. Of far greater the concern are the fact that they will impoverish, by the government's own admission, the people we represent, and that they will deny the ability of people to come and live and work in my country, threatening its future prosperity. In fact, the backstop, really, its most offensive feature is that it serves to underscore the duplicity of the Westminster government when it comes to dealing with representations from Scotland. Because the National Parliament in Scotland has argued precisely for differential arrangements post-Brexit and been told for the last 2 years consistently that they would be impossible because they would compromise the integrity of the United Kingdom, only to find them written down in this withdrawal agreement as regards to Northern Ireland. That is an insult, and it is contempt for the people of Scotland. Let me turn to this question now of the second referendum, and I want to caution some of colleagues who are against the notion of a second referendum about the language that they are using in this debate. Because it is a fantasy and a fiction to try and claim that somehow allowing all of the people of this country to vote in a referendum is anti-democratic. It is true that 17.4... I'll happily give way.
She didn't vote. Of the second referendum. In the Scottish Parliament today, the Constitutional Cabinet Minister was asked would he respect the result of a second referendum, and he wouldn't answer. So I asked the honourable member, would he respect it?
I am consistent in respecting the results of every referendum. 17.4 million people, it is true, voted to leave the European Union. But there are 65 million people in the United Kingdom, and besides, at least 2 million of those 17 million have changed their mind. And in a democracy, people have the right to change their mind. And for people to oppose a second referendum and try and use a historic mandate, which is increasingly out of date, in order to suppress the democratic aspiration of the people in the here and now, is something that is more akin to authoritarian populism than to a liberal democracy. And I urge colleagues not to go down that path in the dialogue. We can't have a referendum. I'll happily give way, yes.
The honourable member is making an excellent point, but doesn't he agree that actually we have had 2 referendums on this, and so it would be the third referendum, so people have been allowed to say as a member of the EU, and also we had a referendum in Northern Ireland on the Good Friday Agreement with a 71% majority, and shouldn't that referendum result be respected, which it isn't in the Prime Minister's own withdrawal agreement?
Well, let me explain it this way. I think that you can never say people don't have the right to reconsider a proposition in a democracy. On the other hand, you can't have a referendum every month or every year, so you have to set tests as to whether or not it is legitimate to have a second referendum. I would set 3. First of all, the information on which the initial decision was taken needs to have substantially changed or been shown to have been wrong. I think that test is met. Secondly, a significant number of people have to have changed their minds, enough to create a different result. I think that test is met. And the third test is whether or not the elected Parliament is incapable or unwilling of discharging the mandate from the referendum. And when we get the chance to vote on it, that test too will have been met. And it is now possible that having a people's referendum is actually the only way to get out of the current impasse and crisis. Now, let me turn to the question of the Labour opposition. And I say this as being completely non-sectarian. I don't just want to work with the Labour Party in defeating this government. I am desperate in order to do so. And I am really concerned at what has happened over the last 24 hours, because there were comments earlier which suggested that, in fact, the miswording of the Labour no confidence resolution, it being in the Prime Minister and not the government, is somehow a mistake, an ineptitude. It's not. We know that it's not. It's a deliberate attempt not to put the question so that it now languishes in the order paper with the same authority and effect as 1,900 other early day motions that are lying around. And I say to the Labour front bench, you need to do something to dispel a growing concern, which is that Labour are not effectively taking on the Conservatives because actually they're not disagreeing with their policies all that much, and they would be quite content to see them go through. The Labour Party needs to lead. It is the biggest opposition party in this House. It needs to step up and coordinate the opposition, which is here on these benches and in those benches too, in order to defeat these proposals. Please do that, and we will be your willing accomplice if you ask us to be so. Finally, can I say this, that there's been a lot of talk earlier about the fact that Scotland, for the time being, remains as part of the United Kingdom. I respect the 2014 referendum result. It does. And we have every right to argue in this Parliament for the benefit of our constituents within the United Kingdom, which is why we are desperately engaged in a process of trying to save this country from itself, from the worst act of collective self-harm in history, by stopping this ridiculous process of Brexit. But know this, we will not go down with the ship if it does not change direction, because we will use our right of self-determination as a lifeboat to escape from this catastrophe. And when the time comes, if this process unfurls the way the government wants it to do so, then you will be the greatest champions of Scottish independence, because the people of Scotland will take their opportunity to chart a different course and to become a proper European nation which is there at the heart of Europe.